Well, it's an honor to be presenting at the annual AFS conference. My first conference was 1999, 24 years ago. And in that conference itself, I delivered a paper titled Videoconferencing for Folklorists, and I mentioned ethnographic videoconferencing, 1999. So I believe I have coined the phrase, for what it's worth. All right, so the theme of this year's conference is roots, rootlessness, and uprooting. So I thought I would say a couple words about that before launching into my topic. I believe that as folklore scholars, we can help community members, sometimes we can help them get in touch with their roots, with their traditions, their history, and members of their community. So we can help community members develop their roots. In addition to that, I really feel that community and rootedness occurs through the process of communication. When people relate to each other, they are together, they are with each other, they are of each other. So, there's the expression, no, please don't spotlight me, at least for me. I'd like to see the other people's images. And if you can, please don't spotlight me at all. Yeah. Let people, each individual person, I'm sure, is familiar with Zoom now, and they can pin my image if they want. It is the expression, home is where the heart is. But I would also add, home is where your loved ones are. And home is where you can talk with your loved ones. You can be with your loved ones. You can relate with your loved ones. That, to me, is home and rootedness. So you can see I am communication-oriented. One word about a word. In folklore, we love this word fieldwork. But there has been some protest about the word recently that to some people it raises memory of when slaves, some slaves did housework and some did fieldwork. So it's for some people it's a disturbing term. So at least for this session today, instead of saying fieldwork, I'm going to say physically present research, or physically present interpersonal ethnographic research, with, of course, participant observation, but for short, physically present research. Okay. Well, Roger Abrams, my dear professor at Penn, said, at most, make 3 points in a presentation. People won't be able to absorb more than 3 points. So I'm going to tell you my 3 points. Number one, I see video conferencing as having evolved from photography, film, and video. And thus, ethnographic photography evolved into ethnographic film, then ethnographic video, and now ethnographic video conferencing. So I'm positing that it's a continuum, an evolution. And the evolution, at least in terms of visual terms, is from still images to moving images that have been recorded. That's what happens in film and video. And then finally, in video conferencing, it has evolved to images that are moving and interacting with each other, because these images are representing living people almost instantaneously. So I ask you to keep in mind this evolution from still images to moving images to interacting images. All right. Second point is I'm going to try to define ethnographic video conferencing. in the sense that I will give a number of conditions and say that a video conference becomes increasingly ethnographic to the degree that, number one, all participants agree that a primary purpose of the event is the presentation of and discussion about aspects of a community's culture. Number two, the video conference involves at least one site that is related to the people whose culture is under study, and one site related to the scholar's university. The scholar can be at either location, but I see those two sites being basic. People who attend at the university-related site could be the scholar, but could also include faculty and students of the university, members of the public who are knowledgeable and interested in the topic, and of course, members of the culture's diaspora community. For example, I did, for my Penn Folklore PhD, I organized some video conferences in 2004 and 2005 between Chennai here in South India and some Tamil people on the Penn campus, actually. So it was Tamil people in Chennai in South India and members of the Tamil diaspora community in Philadelphia. Okay. Number three, ethnographic video conferencing, just like ethnographic photo, film, and video, classically occurs after a year or so of physically present interpersonal research. So I'm not presenting this video conferencing as a substitute for that physically present research. I'm just saying at the end of the research period, it's an option for displaying and documenting data. Number four, the language of the culture under study is used as much as possible during the video conference. And of course, the scholar has done the scholar's best to become fluent. Even if the scholar is not fluent, the scholar has made an effort. And of course, it goes without saying, the scholar has read as much as possible about the culture, not just before the video conference, but before the physically present fieldwork. In number five, the community members are invited to demonstrate a folk process from one or more sites in the video conference. See, of course, video conferences can be recorded, so it's a method of recording. And there can be conversation about it, of course, which is also recorded. Community members have a say regarding how they are presented visually. More about that in a minute. And community members are encouraged to say whatever they might like, including interpreting their own folk processes and asking questions of the other people in the video conference. So, see, I completed my Penn Folklore dissertation in 2010, which was titled Ethnographic Videoconferencing and Children's Singing Games and Language Learning. And then I reduced it to an article titled Ethnographic Videoconferencing, which has not yet been published. I still have hopes for it. But in those works, as mentioned, I was presenting video conferencing as a end of fieldwork activity after physically present fieldwork. That was a different world, of course, that was before the pandemic. Now, I believe there are youngsters in folklore departments who are saying to their professors, oh, I'd like to do all my interpersonal research by video conference, okay? Because it would be too difficult to go there physically, or during the pandemic, many, like tribal people, you couldn't visit them physically. So I know what my professors would have said if I would have said, oh, I'd like to do my research by video conference. I mean, forgive the word, my field work by video conference. Roger Abrams and Dan Benamos bless their souls, would have yelled me out of the office. But things may be a little different now. Okay, so those are 7 or 8 conditions which, the more they are followed, the more it is an ethnographic video conference. And, it's no accident that I'm a student, especially of Roger Abrams, one of the leaders, founders of the performance-centered approach to folklore, which I like to also call the process-centered approach to folklore, because I like the process of conversation in a video conference and how members are interacting with each other and how they're interacting with people outside the community. It's all, and to record it, it's all, then you can do conversation analysis. You can do discourse analysis on the way people are being with each other. So I am a performance and process person. And now my third point, and I've complicated matters greatly, but my third point is I'm returning to the idea that in ethnographic video conferences, the people under study are very empowered in the sense that they can control the image of themselves that is going out, and they can ask questions and make comments to the scholars who are studying their culture. So. Representation has been an issue since the beginning in folklore and anthropology. With photography and film, of course, all of the image making is controlled by the scholars and their video workers. Okay, if this was a classroom, I would stop and ask for questions and comments. But since time is limited, I'm gonna plow on. Please forgive me. Okay, I'm going to give a quick history of ethnographic photography, film, and video. Very quick, and just to set up the remaining things I want to say about ethnographic video conferencing. Photography as a technology, and by the way, the academic disciplines of anthropology and folklore came into existence approximately the same time, and were parts of the process of the West colonizing the rest of the world. So that goes together with the idea that the people under study didn't have much to say about the whole thing. Giants of early ethnographic photography included Edward Curtis, Robert Flaherty, Margaret Mead, and Gregory Bateson. Edward Curtis published 20 volumes of photographs of Native American people in the northern British Columbia, and he made a movie, In the Land of the Headhunters, 1914. It did not do very well commercially, in part, some people thought, because there were no characters who people could really relate to. And that was not the case in the next work I'm going to mention, which was Robert Flaherty's film, Nanook of the North, which came out in 1922, which also involved northern Canada, Eskimos or Inuit people perhaps, but that was called Nanook of the North, and it followed very emotionally the struggles of one particular man as a hunter, as a provider for his family, and that was very commercially successful. Margaret Mead and Gregory Bateson published books of photographs regarding child rearing in Indonesia and New Guinea. They did the filming in 1936 and 37, but it was only, the movies were only released in 1958, 20 years later. Following these innovators, there have been so many others, but as mentioned, often processes were filmed and then edited out of order. They were interpreted by a voiceover who was, explaining what it all meant. and often the translations were not word for word, obviously. So it was the people in the movies again couldn't control the narrative very much. Timothy Ash is a central figure in this. He worked with many anthropologists, including Napoleon Chagnon in Venezuela, with the Yanomamo people, and there's been some controversy about the methods of Napoleon Chagnon, but Timothy Ash worked with him. One of the controversy is I think he paid the people sometimes with knives. So that sort of encouraged violent behavior. I believe that's one of the criticisms of Napoleon Chagnon. And in general, their life was sensationalized. So by the mid-70s, Timothy Ash had changed. He said, this is a quote, "Films of people who look exotic can be and frequently are used to reinforce Western prejudices about primitive people. I regretted not filming more Yanomamo conversations, which would have allowed individual Yanomamo people to reveal their thoughts and opinions more directly. It is disappointing that so few individual characters emerge in my films." So he regretted not making clear that these people have interiors, intellectual, emotional, other types of interiors. And again, I quote, "I am no longer interested in making films about them because I'm seeing in the kinds of films, I'm no longer interested in making films about them. I am interested in seeing the kinds of films that they might make about themselves. Moreover, I now question my role as an outsider representing their life and concerns to the outside world." And there's been a good deal of work along these lines, including Sharon Sherman's book in 1998, Documenting Ourselves, about how people in different communities video recording themselves and sharing those videos. And now we come to indigenous media, which is a direct development out of ethnographic film and video. Professor Saul Worth in a communication department and Professor John Adair in an anthropology department teamed up and took 16mm film equipment to a Navajo community in New Mexico and put the equipment in their hands and said, make a film in your way about your life and your people. So there was a lot of filming of people walking. There were very few close-ups, but a striking finding of the scholars was that the Native American people were especially interested in the social processes around the production and exhibition of the films. They were very concerned about who was, operating the cameras, who was attending the screenings. That social aspect was surprisingly important. And then I'll mention one more scholar, Eric Michaels, who was an American person, and in the early 70s he was hired by the government of Australia to advise the government about how to facilitate the Aboriginal people watching and absorbing the TV shows made in the Australian cities by Australian white people. So what Eric Michaels found when he visited the outback was that a number of Aboriginal communities, they were making their own videos and transmitting the videos to each other via radio signals or something. So Eric Michaels became a very outspoken champion of the Aboriginal people making their own videos, not just receiving it from the capital of Australia. And tragically, Eric Michaels passed away at a young age, but he was the inspiration for people in a town north of Alice Springs, members of the Warlpiri people in Uwindumu and other villages. He was the inspiration for them to create a video conferencing network. See, the technology was just becoming possible in 1992. And so a member of the Warlpiri people, Robin Japananka Granitz, and a white Australian educator and politician, Peter Toyin, they began the Tanami network, named after a local desert, where they used video conferencing for school and also for selling art and talking about their art. So that was a major happening. And I found out about that when I was at Penn, and we had something called the Graduate Student Video Conference Series, which was basically me. And we did a video conference with Robin and his team in Australia. I can show you the link. By the way, I'm putting supporting documents for today's session on my website, Storytelling Institute / and then today's date, 12/2023.html, and I'll include the link to a section of the video conference with the Aboriginal people there in Uwindumu. All right, so I have 10 minutes left. About video conferencing, because my PhD dissertation involved setting up some video conferences between people in Chennai and people in Philadelphia, I became a little bit of a historian about video conferencing and tracked it back to crystal balls. Remember crystal balls? Where you could see long distances and into the future. That was part of the fantasy which developed. Electricity, of course, came into being in the early 1800s, and then the telegraph, and then the telephone, and then the radio, and there was a lot of fantasy about seeing by electricity, seeing by from a distance, which turned into television, and then two-way television. By the 1930s, there were experiments with Bell Labs demonstrated a two-way system in 1930. In 1964, at the New York World's Fair, AT&T displayed a video phone. And then, of course, with the flights to the moon and all, there was two-way video, and it was in popular culture. Dick Tracy had a two-way wristwatch in 1964, and Star Trek, the Jetsons, they were all video conferencing. And news shows from the 60s onward, it was just the most common thing that the anchor in the studio would be talking to people outside the studio. That was video conferencing. Okay, conclusions. My biggest thing that I want to say is that the pandemic has changed the world in terms of communication. I call it the Zoom pandemic, because in this case, as in cases in the past, a socio-historical event has ushered in a new technology. When I was trying to tell Dan Benamos and Roger Abrams in 1999 that video conferencing, that the folk are doing their folk activities by video conference, they told me to be quiet. They were really not interested, because folklorists in those days, they were reacting so much against television, which they saw as the killer of local culture, which it was. But I said, no, this is not TV, this is two-way, and people can represent themselves. They didn't really want to hear about it. And it stayed like that, also with professional storytellers who I work with. It stayed like that until the pandemic. Then suddenly, people got a little more tolerant of video conferencing and realized that it could be very useful. So, and now working at home, it's just become a fact of life. And to me, what it's really all about, to take the long view, I speak of the great dispersal, that soon, we already have space stations. We've already had flights to the moon with humans. In human time, it's happening very slowly, but in other ways, it's happening very quickly, and it will happen very quickly. People are going to be living in space stations, not just as a means of travel, but for decades, people will be living on space stations. And then they may, be living on other celestial bodies. And to me, the great drama is, will we really get off the Earth before we blow up the Earth? With bombs and global warming and everything else. Will humanity get off before we destroy it? That's a great drama. And of course, we got to make sure that they take it used to be people took books and records, but now they can take the internet, which will have the heritage of humanity. But the thing is that these space explorations will be sponsored by governments, wealthy corporations, wealthy individuals, who the top priority might not be democracy in these projects, but there are going to be mutinies. There are going to be hijackings. There are going to be rebellions and revolutions, and we will never hear about most of them. You get it? Because some people who do a mutiny, they'll hack up the telecom equipment so nobody can trace them. So there'll be all sorts of varieties of this. So in those days, if you want to do ethnographic research with someone on a different planet or someone in a space station, I'm sorry, professors, you're going to have to do ethnographic videoconferencing. All right. We have 3 minutes for comments and questions. I prefer comments. Anybody? I've left you speechless. My original article, which I still would like to get published, refers to 3 ethnographic video conferences that I've done. One was with in 2004 and 5 with Indian Tamil children who were showing their singing games to children and adults in Philadelphia. One was between college students in Chennai and Egypt discussing culture, and one was some ritual storytellers from Chennai with translation telling a group at the AFS meeting, I think in 2011, about a certain ritual storytelling. So those are 3 ethnographic video conferences from 10 years ago. But as you can imagine, I've done a little bit since then too. Okay, please, somebody tell me a thought. Yes.
Yeah, if I may.
Please.
Yeah, I'm curious. So as you do this via video conferencing, do you give any thought to the distortion or the effect that the medium might have on the communication there, right? So famously, the colonial medium is the message. Like, is it still the same thing, or are there certain things that will change the performance or the interview or whatever it is that you do?
Well, sure, and that's why you want to do a year of physically present field work first.
Right.
And in general, studies show that video conferencing is most effective when it alternates with physically present communication. Because for one thing, in the days when there was a lag, or when the voice came first and the picture came second, people all thought their video conference partners had brain damage because they were not responding at the normal rhythm. So that's why, yes, it's good to alternate between in-person and between physical presence and telepresence.
I have a question for you. I'm trying to make sure that I'm understanding your argument. So the argument is that video conferencing should always go hand in hand with in-person ethnographic interviews and methodologies, or is it bigger than that?
If possible. In my case, I did a year of field work before I invited the people to do video conferencing. But if you want to do ethnographic work with people on a space station or on the moon, you may not be able to get there.
Sorry guys, we'll have to cut it now. we're on to our second speaker. But thank you very much, Eric, for your interesting talk and the history. It's nice to hear the history and the background of all of this.
Thank you.
Our next speaker